Hey, folks. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. I'm kind of winging it with trying to set this up, my system up, my pretty new system up. Took a little while. Give me a shout out if you're online. So, um, and just say hi, just so I know you're there. So, Dub Dub is happening, and for the last 2 years, I've been kind of tied up writing my book, and it is finally done. Oh my gosh. That took like a year longer than anticipated. Oh well. Let's make sure you can hear me. Yeah, this looks okay. Um so it's time for me to hop back into making content and putting stuff out on the blog, and I've got plans also for creating online courses. But as sort of the steps to get there in an agile fashion, what I want to do is use Twitch as my just wing it and go for it time. And then I'm recording this. And out of this session, in which I plan to explore some of the testing stuff that's available to us now, in some of it's available in pre-beta in release Xcode, and show you some new doodads in the beta, and how my thinking is starting to shift a little bit about what's available to us. I wanted to show that, and just sort of wing it, and then take this recording and boil it down and decide how I want to actually create more bite-sized content from it, probably in the form of videos with blog posts, but hopefully a lot shorter. So let's see. Let us go over here. Hopefully you should be able to see my screen now, and I'm going to start doing some stuff here. I've got a project. Let's open this first in 11.3. Make sure this is set up right. There we go. I've tried to make things bigger so that you could see them all. All right, here we are. All right, here's what we want to do. So all I have is some tests. Now, the scenario that we're going to explore is when you have, in order to get to your test, you do some setup, but it's not just, maybe not only in setup, but it could be in the test portion itself. I tend to think of it as the arrange section, because I think in the 3 A's: arrange, act, assert. So if we come here, by the way, can you all see my screen and some code and Xcode and my face and other things? I'm going to assume a yes. Well, let's run this one. Oh, set it to, darn it. Which Xcode am I in? Here's the first thing I need help with, obviously. Here's a simulator. 13.3. deal. Maybe, oh, it's not turned on a run destination. Okay, let's do that. All right, now let's try. We should have a test which does nothing, just to prove that we can run tests. It's going to fire up the simulator, which takes a little while. Get cranking here. It's the first time round. I don't know why I get that error sometimes. Anyway, here we are. We've got a test which passes because there's nothing inside of the test which fails. Therefore, the test that runs and does not fail is a pass. See that in the green check mark. Wonderful. Now, sometimes though, you want a test which arranges some stuff. And sometimes it can be complicated and it might fail. And this is where some of the stuff gets, this is where we're going to focus today. It might fail. Typically, this doesn't happen when you're just setting up data, but it does happen if you're reading in files of any kind, because you have no guarantee except when you're running that those files are there, that they're load up with the right stuff, that you can be parsed or whatever. So let's just pretend I've got an arrange which fails. And as you can see, an arrange which fails, it just has a comment. It doesn't actually do anything, but it says this is where we'd set up some object graph. And then it says, whoa, fail. Let's see what happens with this. Okay. Now, this fails and then it fails again. Now, if this comes as a surprise to you, especially if you come from a different testing framework background from another platform, maybe like, why didn't it stop on the first failure? And this is because XCTest, this goes back all the way to its origins pre-XCTest, is that by default, this property continue after failure is true. The reason for that, I believe, is because the feedback loop is actually pretty slow. Even to do this, it's fairly slow compared to other platforms. And so rather than stopping at the first failure and saying, okay, I'm out, this test is done, it's like, well, let's continue and gather any information. There may be other useful things we can report about the failure. So it continues, which doesn't make sense if you're arranging something like an object graph and you're like, I need this stuff to run a test, and then it's not there. And so your test is like, I'm going to give up or crash or whatever. So the arrange which fails, it does an XCT fail, and it also continues to this line. Now, there's something else I want to point out here. The arrange which fails shows the failure on this line. This is something I teach in my book, that you really want, for a helper method, you really want the failure to report the call site, not the place, not inside the helper. We can do that pretty easily. I'm going to use a code snippet, which comes to all my subscribers. So if you want this, subscribe, go to qualitycoding.org and say, give me the code snippets on the top right. We pass in a file and line which captures the file name and line number of the call site. And then we have to pass these to XCT-fail. Just like this. Let's do this again and we'll see how this changes. Ah, that's better. Isn't that better? You see the failure indication moved up here. So now we see the arrange which fails, call fails. It does continue on to the failure. What do? We've got some choices. If you have a situation where you really just want to bail out, and that's really I think the underlying motivation of all the stuff we're going to look at today. You have some options. You have some current options. Remember, I'm in Xcode 11.3.3, right? 3.1. One is to turn on this flag, or continue after failure equals false. Let's see what happens now. See, now, range which fails, we hit that XET fail, and it's like, I'm done. And it skips out of the rest of the test. This is old and is available, and you can use it today. But it's kind of hidden away. Yep, I saw that, Joe. It's like, oh no, file path. I have to provide new code snippet for folks on the beta. Good to see you, Joe, so to speak. I wish I could see you, but so that's one option. Another option, which let me just go through these. Here's a range which fails and returns a failure. Let me show you what I don't like about this. Here we pretend to do some arrangement, and then we return success or failure. And here it's like did succeed, false, so it's like fail. This is not great because then we end up with this Boolean out here. Oh, I should do the same thing. Let me try that again with smash G to rerun the last test. Okay. This is not good. I don't like this because I don't want a stray return in a test. Why? Because what if this is, what if this just does that? It's like it didn't succeed, but as far as the test is concerned, it passed. And that's why I don't like keeping a return separate from the failure. What I usually do is if I need to bail out early, this is what I've been doing up until now. If I need to bail out early, I just have an evaluation thing that's a predicate, returns true or false, and then I evaluate that, XET fail and return. Report it and get out. And that works, but it's kind of clunky, but it does work. All right, on to the next sort of scenario. The other way we could pull the ripcord and get out is by throwing an exception. Let's see that here. Here we have a range which throws, and it throws my error, which doesn't have anything interesting in it. It's just an error. And it's a throwing helper. So we have to call it with try, which turns our test into, it also has to be a throwing function. So this changes the semantics a little bit. You see the reporting is not so good now. It did fail. But what exactly? This is where Xcode starts to let down. At least it did. See what it looks like in the beta. Often what I do is look at the log, see, oh, there we go. Now I can see. Tries to run this test case and it failed because it caught an error, because the operation couldn't be completed, because my error. Hard to read, a little mysterious, but it does pinpoint this test. So that's that's where we're going to go. We're going to roll with this down this road. Okay. And this works for as long as you have your arrangement being done inside of the test. Now, if we're in setup, let's see what happens. In setup, what have our choices been and what are they becoming now? Bring classic setup back. And it's going to do the arrange which fails, which just does an XCT fail. This time I'm going to run all the tests, including the test which passes. And so we'll get to see that the test which passes now fails. That's good. But it doesn't here the arrange which the test which fails and then fails again. I can just comment that out. It continues on to the failure. Now we could, this is something you might, if you have a complicated setup, this is something you might consider doing, is saying, well, let's turn continue after failure off. And now let's see what it does. Okay, so now it's saying we have various test failures, and it doesn't get to this one. So we reduce the noise. Again, this is available, has been available since the dawn of time. Since OC unit days. Anybody here harken back to OC unit pre Xcode 4? Woo! Remember that? So this is an option. It is not a bad option, but it might be a little confusing. Let's see the direction that we're trying to go now. The direction we're trying to go now is to have something which, when it fails on arrangement, is just like throw an exception. Pull the ripcord, get out. Now, inside of here, actually, before we do all of that, let's do it sort of yucky way. With a try bang. This is going to throw, which is going to boom. It's going to crash the tests. That's not ideal. It's not awful either, because if you have test setup, which is dependent upon external resources, and those resources, something's wrong, they're in the wrong place, or they're malformed or something like that, then, crashing is, that gives you information. It's better, though, if we don't crash, and if we can report just what happened. There we go. Now we should have setup failure in all these different cases. Yeah. Oh, but it does continue. Wait a second. Ah. So even though it says return, what it's returning out of is setup. And setup is then like, oh, I'm done. And then it continues to run the test. Again, bing, bing, bing. You might consider, in such cases, having continue after failure. Because then we should, like, if it's dying on the setup, why is it coming here? Okay, so that's one option. better option would be if we switch now. I'm going to switch over to recent Xcode, but still not the beta. By the way, I hope everything is legible. I've tried to make it big so that because I'm on a fairly big monitor, but be aware of folks who are watching from their laptops. And let's go to a more updated iOS, even though Xcode doesn't seem to just from peace of mind. We're going to get back into the same scenario we had with the previous version of Xcode. Wake. Yep. Come on now. There's that weird attach error. And I don't know if you've seen, sometimes lately, maybe this is a Catalina thing. I find tests don't necessarily start unless I click on the simulator and say, hey, simulator, are you going to, and it's like, oh, yes, even though I'm not using the simulator except as a test host. Well, not even a host. There's no host app in this case. Okay. Let's now go to the new sexy. Start to discuss how this begins to improve. This is Xcode 11.4, so it's not even the latest non-beta. But we should be able to now have a setup with error which throws, as opposed to setup. It has a different name. Fortunate, but that's Objective-C underneath. Let's try this. Go. So you can see in the failure, let me show it over here. It did. Now it's failing and bailing out. Because this throws, and as soon as it hits that and it throws an exception, it gets out of setup, but then setup is like, whoa, I'm throwing now. And so now the overall test thing, where normally it's like setup, run the test, and then tear down, it just stops that flow. This can be handy. It's too bad that it doesn't show us more information, but that's what the beta does. It does show us failures on each test case, and it shows us in the log very clearly, a little more clearly, I think, than it did before, if I'm not mistaken, that it caught the error. So this is good. What else did I want to show you here? By the way, if you have any questions at any point, just type something. That's the whole purpose of this, is for us to collaborate together while I sort of talk through this out loud, so that I can turn all this into probably a few different blog posts. Or if there's anything you'd like me to try, just let me know. Yeah. So now we've got an arrange which throws. Get rid of this one. It's like that's actually, no, it's fine. It's fine. Okay. Let's get out of setup land for a second. Actually, no, before we do, let's look at the beta, because the beta will be interesting to see how different it is. This was the new information that came in the 1 minute during yesterday's State of the Union talk. Let's get out of here. Let's fire up beta. And get back to the state we were in before. Whoa. Well, here's that silly error again, but now there's a lot more information going on. Look at this. Remember what we had before? We had the red X failure icons here, but no clear message. Now, every test says, you know what? Couldn't complete it because my error. This is great. So that's a lot better. Now, what happens? We don't have it in setup, but we do have it in a particular test. Now let's see what happens again. Okay. That passes. These fail for other reasons. This one, now, in olden days, by which I mean, like, this is still how I've been writing tests, I wouldn't put a throws on there until I needed one. Be like, do I need it? If I don't need it, why should I declare it? Problem with this is it makes it tricky to do helpers which throw. Now it says, what are you going to do with this exception? What do you do? Something with it? Let me know. Here's what not to do. If you just try question and it throws an exception, it will take that exception and it will swallow it and it will go nowhere. Don't do that. This will crash. So that crashes. But we can instead say, you know what? Make this throwing test. Let's have it try. There we go. I have to change this to file path. Joe, you were way ahead of me. All right. So here's the thing. Now it does this sort of thing. Let's see. This is much better. Let's see, I'm just poking around now to see what else I can learn. There was something else I wanted to show. And that was that funny mechanism that we saw briefly during the State of the Union, where not only does it report the thing, it like gave a little helper forwarding thing. You know what I'm talking about? I could swear I saw that yesterday, and now it seems to be different, and I don't understand why. All right, that's something to review. Now, if you've got any ideas, chime in. Otherwise, I'm going to blaze on. One more thing. And that is how this cd skip. We say skip if true. Now this, I believe, yep, is to be marked with a try. Now this is interesting. This is very interesting to me, because what we can do now is this. This is new. Here is how I used to disable tests until today. The way a test knows, a test case, the way the test suite knows to find test cases is it looks for the functions, methods, which start with test and have no arguments. So all we have to do to violate one of these rules is, and it's got to be like non-private. Don't do this. This is confusing as heck. Let me clear that. Wait a second. Is it doing this? Is this left over? I suspect this is, yeah, this is a ghost error. Let's close this and bring it back. That's a ghost error. So here's what not to do on tests. Don't make them private. Otherwise they won't run. And then they won't fail. Then they're useless. Right now, looking through some stuff that is not necessarily released in the Xcode beta. Some of it came out in Xcode. Actually, a good chunk of it, most of it came out in Xcode 11.4 and was a sneak preview. I'm not doing TDD. I'm just looking at sort of the tools we have with Xtest and Xcode. And so here's what not to do with the test. If you ever want to hide it, don't ever mark it private. It'll never run. But what happens if you have a test that you're like, I really need to turn it off? Well, but I only want to do it temporarily. Here's what else not to do. Don't comment it out. The problem with commenting out a test is that it's no longer compiling. This means anything in here can go stale and you will never know it. Let's, say arrange which throws it gets renamed. And then we bring it back and it's like, suddenly it doesn't compile. We don't want tests to go stale. The way I have in the past, or up until now, disabled a test is to say, well, it can be anything. It can be just not make it start with test and the test will not run. It won't even be there. It loses its little lozenge shape and everything. I tend to go like this to use a standard string so that I can find them. At least this is what I've done up until now. But now we have another option. We can say skip if, and it's just like skip if true. Get out. And now we can at least see some documentation that something was skipped. It shows up. This is cool. in Java, um, well, if it's private and it runs, fine. But you know what I what I really wish we could do, again, taking a cue from JUnit, which has been doing this for a very long time now, is I wish we could do this. Wouldn't that be nice? Instead of having uh, something like this try skip if true disabled, if we could say mark it as at disabled. What I would really, really like is if I could mark the function itself as a test and get rid of this name and then be able to name the test with spaces to have like real words written out. This would be so awesome. Hello. I've got good friends working on Xcode over at Apple. And so if any of you are watching, boy, this would be on my wish list as something that would be awesome if we could get just a bit of sugar to not have to do this. We're back to disabled. All right. Is that everything I wanted to show today? I'm still a little mystified that I can't produce today what I saw yesterday, which was sort of the helper that I could click through to see, oh, this is actually caused by this other thing, which threw an exception, click through and get there. I'm a little miffed that that didn't happen today. Anyway, my conclusion from this is this skip if is going to be useful in a lot of cases. There's going to be a session Thursday, I think. There's going to be a session specifically about XCT skip if. So it'll be fun to learn more about it, maybe a little bit more about how it works and what they're thinking about some of the scenarios in which it becomes useful besides just skip if true. You know, you could have, of course, this is some sort of predicate where you could say, was this set up properly? And if it wasn't set up properly, skip it and say why. Having the message is probably almost always a good idea. Let's see what it looks like without the message. Yeah, it just says test skipped, which maybe that's okay for disabled, but I think I would rather always have a message, especially if they're going to be other skip ifs, and if they may or may not have a message, I'd like to know exactly why it's being skipped. So if this is disabled on purpose, I'd rather say so. Now, to use skip if, we can't just, we can't do this to say, just skip this test, but mark it and compile it. However, we also have this try in here. So we can't do this unless the method, unless the function is a throwing function. And now this brings me to something interesting, which is maybe it's time to add throws to every single test so that we can liberally use skip if we want to without renaming. This is sort of my conclusion and part of why I was originally resistant to using setup as opposed to setup, the throwing setup. I thought, how often does this happen? Well, maybe not often, but if it happens at all, and this is now the new um, sort of, it's not a default, but it comes in when you make a new test suite, then I should say it comes when you use a test suite using Apple's template, then that suggests that they think it's a good idea. I was resistant. Here, I'll show you what it looks like before we wrap up this time. So let's make a new unit test case class, say foo tests. Now, as usual, template comes with a bunch of junk. But here we see sort of they're leaning us toward making, just say, tack on throws everywhere, so that it's much easier to have a thing that can pull the ripcord just by throwing it. Is that hugely better than something which fails and then continue after failure is false? If you weren't here for that, let me just repeat this exercise here. Here we have something which, a test which has a failure in it, but it's also going to call this other helper which fails. Now let's do that. And now we get both failures, which gives us a lot of information. Sometimes it can be noisy. If you want to stop after the first failure, set continue after failure to false. And there it, as soon as it hits a failure, it stops. So throwing an exception, it's kind of like, well, let's have that instead of doing this mechanism. Is this better? I don't know. But I am starting to think that it is time to start adding throws on everything, so that if I ever want to do a skip if, especially using this to mark disabled tests, then I don't need to change anything. Word of caution, if you have any, if you're using FB snapshot test case to do view snapshots, if you rename such a test to throws, that, or I should say, if you make it throwing, that changes its name, adds like something onto it, which means that the saved image, which matches the test name, will no longer match up. So that's something to be aware of, but otherwise, maybe it's time to just put throws on everything. In which case, maybe it's time for me to bite the bullet and just call setup with error that throws. Now, one thing that Apple does not do, they stopped doing a little while ago, was calling super. Technically, you can get away with that because Xe test case, its implementation of these is empty. So it's like, yeah, super, but super is going to do nothing. And so it's like, don't call it. Now that seems like poor OO to me. I know object orientation is a bad word these days. One loves all the functional. Why not both? Why not both? But having an override that doesn't call super is smelly to me, especially if, let's say, we decide to reparent a bunch of these into our own Xe test case subclass. Then you definitely want it to call super, so that, because that's usually all the parent class does is set up some stuff. in such times when I've had abstract base classes for test cases, I've usually like had a failure, and then inside of the test, I don't know, it would get ugly. So as far as like whether or not it should continue, I probably should have just set continue after failure to false. Maybe this is clearer, a little more obvious to have it throw. Anyway, that's about all I got. Let's go back to full face here. If thanks for joining along, and I hope this is useful. I'm going to review this recording so that I know I can understand a little more and get a better understanding of how to present this in bite-sized form that's clear to digest. And how many blog posts is this? Well, it's at least 2. The skip if might be good to do on its own. And then there's the try stuff. Then there's the ability to do it with setup with error. Okay, it's probably about 3 blog posts. So that's good. That gives me something to work on, something for you to look forward to. My book, iOS Unit Testing by Example, is done. It is going now to the printers for actual like dead tree paper versions. For those of you who are old school like me, like books in real book form, not your kids with your ebooks. What do you think of next? But if you like the ebook version, it is done. Go get it. It's on pragprog.com. If you like the print version, Pragprog will also has partnered with somebody, I forget who, for print version. I would lean towards that. It'll also be going up on Amazon. All right. Any questions? Is there anything anything you would like to see before we say goodbye? Going once. This sounds good. I'll find out in the recording. Guess how all this looks. Going twice. Okay. I'm out of here. Thank you for participating, and we'll make this into some blog posts that are more useful, and then eventually to classes. That's why I bought all sorts of gear. Looks like I need an arm thing. This is kind of ugly to have a regular boom mic arm. Anyway, ciao. Take care.